Our exports to the EU have plummeted, and the European Parliament shows no urgency in signing off the trade deal. Is this just teething trouble or big trouble for British business? We'll be discussing this with the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade and a former Tory Trade Minister. Also tonight, we bring back Newsnight's panel of pupils to tell us what it's been like to have had a week of real live school.
I was happy because I was finally going back, but nervous because I didn't know what it was going to be like, or if it was going to be like really different to what it was before.
Good evening. The EU was, before Brexit, and is still expected to be our biggest trading partner. But a record drop in that trade of 40.7% in exports in January, the largest decline since comparable records began in 1997, looks like more than a little snagging. The government explained the sharp trading deficit as a unique combination of factors, including stockpiling last year, COVID lockdowns across Europe, and business adjusting to our new trading relationship. But if all these factors were in play, why did our trade for the same period with non-EU countries hold up so much better? And if the problem is Brexit controls, does our increasingly fraught relationship with the EU suggest it's a problem that's not going to be easily solved? Here's our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban.
For 1,000 years, British merchant ships have sailed the seas, extending British trade horizons and British power throughout
Imports
the world.
have long fueled the British economy, even if a generation or two ago it was a global, imperial free trade area that provided them. And just as the emergence of post-imperial trade produced dislocation and change, now the post-Brexit regime is producing its own consequences.
It's a 1 month change, and it's quite significant, and you can actually pinpoint it to, it's not as if you can reduce the impact of the goods trade change with what's happened in December, for example, when the border closed with France. So it's quite significant. The question is how permanent is it?
UK exports to the EU fell in January by 41%, and imports from the EU by 29%. The big gap between those figures is explained in large part by the waiving of checks on goods coming into Britain, while the EU has applied the rules. Trade with the rest of the world fell by 8% for exports and imports by 9%. So that gives an idea of the COVID effect, but even taking that and pre-Brexit stockpiling into account, it's a big drop with the EU. How does that work in practice? Time to visit the cheese shop.
I'll just have that little bit on top of it, and then we'll try that one.
Neil's Yard built its business on high-quality UK cheeses. Its attempts to continue exporting to European customers post-Brexit have proven challenging.
From the 1st of January to the end of January, we didn't export a gram of cheese. That's how complicated it was. And Europe is our fastest growing, has been our fastest growing export market. But we made a couple of attempts to export to Europe, to Paris, in the second half of January, and it was very, very difficult, and there was very long delays, and we had an aborted attempt, which where the truck was forced to return. So yeah, it's been difficult. With every shipment, it becomes maybe slightly easier, but the delays have been very, very long.
The government's response to today's figures has been to emphasise exceptional circumstances.
We are working very closely with the EU. It's in everybody's interest that trade is as smooth as possible. We were always clear there would be extra processes that would need to be undertaken, and I'm confident that we will continue to build exports to the EU as well as exports to the rest of the world.
Inevitably, some exports are harder hit, with clothes down 68% and footwear 73%. As for those sectors where new trade rules will make long-term recovery harder, food and live animal exports to the EU are down 54% overall, with fish and shellfish down from £92 million last January to 16 this one, live animals from 22 million to 6 million, and cheese down by 2/3. And just as the evolution of ports and the loss of empire trade put the Thames bargees and warehousemen out of business, so the new regime of trade with Europe will create change. As the patterns of trade shift in the coming years, the biggest losers are likely to be in sectors like food and livestock export. They've got to deal with the full range of regulations, health, customs, and the increased haulage costs, all of which will have to be passed on to customers with a likely impact on their export market. How great a weight will the new EU trading regime put on exporters like this cheese business? The boss is quite candid about its impact.
A double-digit increase in price, it will have more than, a 10% increase in price will have probably a 30% increase or impact in decreasing our sales.
There will be new markets and new opportunities, no doubt. Today's businesses will have to repeat the country's earlier feat of restructuring, but this time in a post-Brexit, post-pandemic world.
Mark Urban, well, we invited the government onto the programme tonight, but they declined. I am joined by the Shadow International Trade Secretary, Emily Thornberry, Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders, and former Conservative Trade Minister and current member of the International Trade Select Committee, Mark Garnier. Good evening to you all. If I could bring with you Mark Garnier, begin. Centre for European Reform reckons about half the reduction in trade isn't COVID, it isn't stockpiling, but different trading regimes. Do you accept that that is a much more intractable problem?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think if you're an exporter who's exporting small quantities, so relatively low value of packets of goods, then your cost of exporting has now gone up very, very significantly compared with the value of what you're exporting. But I think until we've seen this really bed down over the next sort of coming months or even years, we won't really know the exact effect how this has had on.
Well, when you talk about coming months and coming years, the problem is that some of the agriculture, livestock and fishing industry doesn't have years to wait. There's a massive drop, 92 million to 16 million in food exports. That isn't something that, if it's not solved within a few months, then businesses will go under. Exactly right, and this is why we need this deal ratified properly by the European Parliament, and we need to move on with this. But as I say, I'm prepared at this stage to give the benefit of the doubt to the government in terms of the fact that there are teething problems with this. But you're absolutely right, Kirsty. We want to continue to trade with the European Union, and sanitary and phytosanitary products are very important for us. But if you heard there from the cheesemaker from Neil's Yard, and he was saying that 10% has been added because of the cost of red tape, but the increase in cost of business is 2 or 3 times that, 30%. I mean, that is unsustainable. Yes, exactly. And if we don't move forward and we don't learn how to use these systems and we don't improve these systems, then it is, of course, going to be unsustainable. And only the very high value exports are going to be the ones that are going to continue. The other thing, Kirsty, that I would say is that we need to also be looking at exports and services, and particularly financial services, where we're seeing a lot of banks and financial services institutions setting up in the European Union. And it'll be interesting to see, and I'll be very interested in what Stephanie Flanders has to say about this, but what happens in terms of how we account for that in terms of our exports. Yes, but of course we do need live businesses actually working in all the different countries of the United Kingdom. Emily Thornberry, coming to you. Lord Frost, the Minister of State for the Cabinet, and also the ONS have blamed stockpiling and COVID, because what they're saying is that overall freight volumes between the UK and the EU are back to normal levels now for over a month, suggests that it is just teething problems.
Well, I've written today to one of the trade ministers about those stats which they're using, which I do think are very not reliable. But let's say even if it is, even if there are the same amount of lorries going backwards and forwards, which I don't think there are, it's what's in the lorries which is important. Are they coming in full and going out empty? Are they coming in half full and what is it that's in them? Counting the number of lorries in and off ro-ro ferries is not necessarily enough by itself. I think that certainly some of the problems are transitory. Some of the problems, we can't say just because we had these terrible results in January that is going to continue. But I think there are 3 problems. One is that some of the problems are a fundamental consequence of the decisions that we made about the sort of Brexit that we wanted. So coming out of the customs union, coming out of the single market does mean there will be barriers to trade that aren't just tariffs. I think the second thing is that the deal itself has failed to address a number of issues, which, as we've heard, certainly in terms of food, agricultural produce, and so on, we seem to have a worse regime than the New Zealanders do when it comes to exporting into Europe. And we have talked, we haven't talked about services, and obviously our economy fundamentally is a services economy, and there's next to nothing in the deal which helps to smooth the way for services. And the third thing is a lack of time and preparation. I mean, getting a deal on Christmas Eve or whenever it was, when we don't have enough vets, we don't have enough customs agents, and businesses simply haven't had enough time to prepare.
So Emily Thornberry, do you now regret voting for the deal? Do you think that was a mistake in December?
Listen, we lost the general election. And when we lost the general election, we lost the argument on staying in the European Union. And we had to move on. So that was the decision that was made. There was the Brexit vote, there was the general election. What we now have to do, I'm a pragmatic politician. What I want is the very best deal that we can have now with the European Union, with our closest neighbours, with whom we will always do the bulk of our trade.
Well, let's come on to talking about financial services in a minute, Stephanie Flanders. But first of all, how serious do you think this is? All the barriers to trade, or whether they're transitory or not, are affecting, particularly in the agricultural business and fishing business, who don't have a lot of time.
No, and you can see some extraordinary numbers in these figures. And as Mark Urban pointed out, for the shellfish and things like that, which are down more than 80%, there's not much prospect that it's going to get a lot better unless you have a new kind of arrangement, a new kind of deal with Europe, at least on that. But it is a bit extraordinary. I mean, Mark Garnier has just given a much more kind of straightforward acceptance of quite how much the difference this has made, the red tape, particularly for small-scale exporters, than any minister I've heard. It was very much, as Emily Thornberry says, an element of this deal that it was going to impose these kind of costs. And it's true that, if the numbers continue to be as bad as January, that would be an extraordinary impact and not one that we're expecting. But to have so little conversation around, what the positive plan is, whether it's for services or for anything else, does seem to me very odd. And to have the junking of an industrial strategy, which had been developed over 3 years, with a sort of stroke of a pen in the budget last week.
But presumably, the good news stories would be big trade deals. We've done all these lots of trade deals, Mark Garnier, which is obviously replicating as an individual country what the EU had with the countries in question. And from everything from Albania to Japan, but none of the deals that would be transformative. We haven't got the India deal, we haven't got China deal, we haven't got the Australia deal, we haven't got the US deal. Why were these not, as your boss likes to talk about, oven ready?
Well, we are moving on. We're working on the US deal, the New Zealand, the CPTPP, and Australia. And the Japan deal was slightly better than the JIPA deal, which was done between Japan and the European Union, and sort of slightly more tailored for us. So I think we are moving ahead with this. But at the end of the day, we have, I think it's about 67% of our total trade is now covered by these deals, which we've carried out.
But we want to grow the trade. Isn't that the point? We were going to grow the trade with these new reinvigorated trading partners once we were outside the EU.
Yes, and that's what we're doing. We're moving forward to do a trade deal, for example, with the US, which is one that's failed to be achieved.
How quickly do you think, though? How quickly?
It's a big deal. It's 14% of our total trade, and so we've got a lot of things to get through. But
I just wanted to pick you up in a minute on that. But Stephanie Flanders, you're shaking your head about the idea that we're going to do a quick turnaround American trade deal.
But even if we did, imagine if we got a deal, a fantastic deal with the US, a fantastic free trade deal with the US tomorrow. Our economists looked at this, and you would need at least 4 or 5 Americas to do a deal with in order to just replicate the kind of the trade that we might have potentially lost from leaving single market. If you look at what we've just the straightforward cost to trade of making it more difficult to trade with our biggest trading partner, you need to find 4 Americas to do a really good free trade deal with. And unfortunately, if you look around the world, there is only one America. There's only one economy that we could get that kind of benefit.
So let's just quickly talk about financial services sector. we've got a memorandum with the financial services, but we don't have a deal. Does that matter?
I think on financial services, we knew for a long time that it had been left out of the detailed negotiations of the last couple of years, and that there was going to be quite a lot of movement, as Mark Garnier says. There's parts of financial services that we've already seen gone. And I think even if we did find some kind of arrangement with the EU on this, and they've shown no desire to make it easier for us to sustain our position, whether or not that's in their interest, they haven't shown any desire to do that. We have seen quite a lot of London's business and its sense of being a major global financial centre already kind of seeping away over the last few months. We had there are polls suggesting that only a third of financiers now think that the city is the world's preeminent global hub. And
let me just put this to Emily Thornberry, a counterpoint which comes from PricewaterhouseCoopers, who say that the UK has overtaken India as the world's fourth most promising growth opportunity. And foreign direct investment generally has always been an attractive destination. The FDI has actually held up.
Well, let's see. I mean, I think there are many advantages for people investing in the UK. Of course, there are, and many people want to live here, and for every reason, you know. So it isn't just always, you know, kind of pounds and pence quite often. But I think in the end, when it comes to trade deals, as Stephanie has said, the question is there enough trade around the world to make up for any losses that we may make in trade with the European Union? And the second point is, at what cost? So, you know, which countries are we prepared to make deals with, and on what basis? Are we prepared to protect our agriculture, for example, if we want to do a deal with America that has very different food production standards? What are we going to do about protecting access to patient data for the National Health Service? What about data generally? There is a whole lot of questions when we're coming to making deals with other countries that have culturally very different approaches to these things and very different economies.
Thank you all very much indeed.